first heard of John Noltner back, I think in 2017, when he was at Holden Village, photographing people and asking them questions like, what kind of world do you want to live in? And when have you seen good examples of peace? I didn't get photographed. I watched around the edges. I don't know. I just didn't. I just didn't. I think he's going to begin the story around that time. I was in the photograph. There was a point when he got everyone in the village up on this place called Chalet Hill to make a big peace symbol with the mountains in the background. It took us a long time to get that photo right, but I was in that one. I think he's going to begin his story around that time, but what happens next is really what next levels the awe for me in this creator. So, John, I'm going to let you take it from here, and I'll come back up and ask you some questions at the end. Mm-hmm.
Good morning. I don't know if it's entirely fair for you to crack me open with that music and that poem and then expect me to be composed up here. Three things I want to start with before we talk a little bit. The first is that I've been going about 103 miles an hour, and this place, look it. Yeah. This place and this time feels like a warm, welcome place of rest. So thank you. I will also tell you that I am not a theologian. I do call myself an untrained, vagabond, earthbound theologian, but I can't quote a lot of scripture. I don't think I could say all 10 commandments right now, but I get the gist of them. We could practice later when my microphone is off. But the third thing I want you to know before we start is that everything about this project is rooted in the part of Scripture that I'm continually drawn to, which is the part that says, love one another. And I've looked for the loopholes and the exceptions, and I don't think they exist. And it doesn't say love the ones that look like you. It doesn't say love the ones that live like you. This one's hard. It doesn't say love the ones that voted like you in the last election cycle. It says love one another, period. And that's where this project begins. So you maybe want to orient yourself so you can see the screens pretty well, because I promise you what's on there is more interesting than what's up here. But what I want to do this morning for this little bit is to take you on a journey, because that's what this project has been for me. And I've spent my career as a freelance photographer, and I've had the chance for decades to shoot travel projects across the United States and around the world. I've had the good luck to have Mr. Wade Barry with me on a number of those projects. We've worked together, and that's been a treat. But in this process, I came to realize that it was my job to see beauty in unexpected places. That people actually hired me to see good where others might struggle to recognize it. And that doesn't mean that we ignore the challenges of the world, right? I think we know this more and more every day. The world is filled with challenges, and it's important that we address them honestly and directly, but I'm convinced that there's a way we can approach those challenges. I'm convinced we're called to approach those challenges with a grace and a hope and the belief that something better is possible. So as a freelance photographer, you're always making choices about the jobs you'll accept. Does this square up with my worldview? Does it support ideas I believe in? Does it pay enough to justify being away from my family for a certain length of time? And at our house, we came to embrace this saying, which is, some jobs feed the belly. You probably know how it ends. Yeah, some jobs feed the soul. When you're really lucky, your job can do both. And when I started this project, there were two things going on in my life. The first is that my soul was getting hungry because I was increasingly frustrated with the quality of our national dialogue. Hasn't gotten better in the 17 years I've been doing this. But I was worried about everything that asks us to look at what can separate us, and I wondered if there was a way I could use my skill set, my photography and storytelling, to remember what connects us. That's the first thing that was going on. Second thing, I like to say the economy handed me some free time. Maybe you know some other people that happened to. Maybe it happened to you. But the recession hit the world of freelance photography really hard, and my workload dropped quickly and dramatically. And if I was a better business person, I would have used that time to look for new clients. But not every decision we make is based in dollars and cents. You know, there are other ways we can measure our success. And like I said, my soul was getting hungry, and so this is how I fed it. I started playing around with this question, what does peace mean to you? Because most everybody I'd met would welcome a little bit more peace into their lives or their families or their neighborhood, or, you know, even my friends in the U.S. military would rather stay home with their families when they could. But I think we say we want peace, but we're not good at getting it. We're not good at making it. So you might have high school students who will flash the peace sign when they walk down the halls and frame up their selfies, and then they'll form into cliques and bully their own classmates. My peace activist friends that'll carry a sign that says, give peace a chance, can't get along with their immediate family members. At my church in Bloomington, called, ironically, Peace Lutheran Church, you have people who nod up and down on Sunday morning while they listen to the story of the Good Samaritan. Story about helping somebody in need no matter who it is, and then Monday they'll walk right by somebody in need like it's not their deal. That's not a critique of my church. That's a critique of the human condition, because we all do it. There's a disconnect between what we say we value and how we live our day-to-day lives. And that's what I wanted to explore. And once we knew this question, the process was remarkably simple. We sat down with people from all different backgrounds and we listened. That's it. Not to decide who was right and who was wrong, not to debate or debunk, not to correct, coerce, or convince, but just to listen to understand and imagine if we could do a little bit more of that with one another and what that might look like. So I've been working on this project for 17 years, but during the pandemic, my wife and I sort of upped the ante, and we sold our house. It's where we raised our kids. They were off doing their own thing. I never wanted to rake those leaves again. So it was Karen's idea. She said, you know, you can't do your programming that you're used to doing, but maybe you could still do new interviews. And so we sold the house, we got rid of all of our stuff, and we hit the road. This became our home for 2.5 years. His name is Vinny. Vinny Van Gogh. Get it? Yeah. And over the course of 2.5 years, we drove 93,000 miles across the country. And I'll just show you a little eye candy. Some days our backyard looked like that. Other days more like that. Or like that. I had a hard time explaining to people I was still working. I went to get my hair cut at a Great Clips, and the woman's like, wow, it must be nice to be retired. I'm like, no, I'm not retired. I'm doing these photos and these interviews. And she said, wonder what I'll do when I'm retired like you. Now, I don't think you heard me, but granted, some days my office looked a little different than others. You know, sometimes it looked like this, and the commute went from bad to worse, and some days the traffic was ridiculous. This was the day that Yellowstone opened the roads to vehicle traffic. They forgot to tell the bison. Karen was driving, and she said, what should I do? I said, I think you should stop. And they passed and they went on. So we get to see some amazing parts of our country on this journey, but we very specifically set out to find the beauty and wisdom in the people. We very intentionally went to all of these points of conflict and tension in our country to find people who are looking for creative solutions to these really challenging issues. And speaking of challenging issues, we went to Washington, D.C. And while we were there, I got to interview a woman named Rose Berger who works for Sojourners. Does anybody know Sojourners? They work at the intersection of faith and justice. And Rose had just gotten back from Ukraine. She had just gotten back from Kyiv, where she went on an interfaith prayer delegation to pray for peace in the midst of a war zone. And she's done this before. She's been in Chad during the Civil War. She went to Israel and Gaza during a previous conflict. She's been in Northern Ireland during their sectarian violence that they call, sort of soft-pedaled, they call the Troubles. Yeah. But she said she and her partner sat down and realized that maybe it was worth taking a small risk to go to Kyiv. And I said, okay, Rose, I get that, but I got to tell you, some of the people I know might interpret that as a big risk. Right? You're going into a war zone, an actual war zone. She said, yeah, but I've come to realize that things look scarier from far away. I thought, oh. Sometimes that thing we think we understand that's over there might not be quite like that. And when we get close, when we get in proximity to those things, we can see them in new ways. And that was part of our journey. What was the reading today that said your eyes were closed to what peace? You couldn't see what peace is. And for me, part of this journey is to be in proximity to the people who are impacted and the folks who are finding these solutions and try to start to see these new meanings of peace. Rose said that she wanted to hug and hold these people who were going through such a hard thing, and that wasn't something she could do over Zoom. We went down to the border to talk about immigration, and when I go a place like that, I want to talk to asylum seekers, I want to talk to activists, but I also want to talk to ranchers and Border Patrol agents, because for me, no one of us holds the whole truth. Each one of us has a little thread of the truth based on the way we go through our days and the things we've experienced. But for me, when you start weaving those threads together, it turns into this fabric that looks more like truth. And when I was down there, I got to spend some time with Alvaro Enciso, who's a Colombian immigrant. Lives in Tucson. He found a map. He wanted to attach his immigration experience to his art. He's an artist, and he found a map of the Sonoran Desert south of Tucson, and it had all these little red dots on it. And he didn't know at first what it was, but it turned out those red dots marked the GPS coordinates where migrants' remains had been found in the desert. There were 4,000 dots on his map. And Alvaro builds these beautiful wooden crosses, and every Tuesday he carries 3 or 4 of them out to those GPS coordinates and places them in the ground, because for him he wants to use his art to help make the invisible visible again. We went up to Lake Superior to talk about water resources. I got to spend time with the water protectors who were protesting an oil pipeline that ran under the Mississippi River, indigenous-led, women-led movement that was trying to protect those resources. And when I was there, I got to meet Tanya Abed, an Anishinaabe woman who started her interview by saying, "I've come to realize I can't trust the system because the system wasn't built with people like me in mind." And she said she wanted to protect the ability to hunt and fish and wild rice that had been passed on to her, and she wanted to be able to pass it on to her kids and their kids and their kids, because in the Anishinaabe tradition, they're thinking 7 generations down the road. How is this thing we're doing now going to impact us 7 years or 7 generations in the future? And sometimes I think I'm going to talk about one thing, and I wind up talking about another. And I met Rendell Sam with the water protectors, and I told him about my peace project, and he rolled up his pant leg, and he had a big old tattoo of a peace sign, and he said, "I think we're supposed to talk." I'm like, "All right, let's talk." And what he really wanted to talk about was his journey to recovery, that he'd spent 30 years addicted to alcohol and another 3 addicted to opioids. Finally found his path to recovery through the years, and now he said he decided he wants to recover out loud so other people don't have to struggle in silence. He's trying to make sure other people get the help they need as well. So we share these stories as books. That one that Pastor Holly was talking about, that just won the, that's the journey of 2.5 years on the road. That's the stories in those books that just won the Minnesota Book Awards last year. We've got 5 traveling exhibits we bring around the country to share these stories and to encourage people to have conversations about conflict resolution and civic responsibility and social change. And then we started making this a little more interactive. So we started doing public studios, which is what we did at Holden Village. When George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, that was 11.6 miles north of my house in Bloomington. And I didn't really know how to respond, but I brought my little studio process down there every day for the first week. And we just asked people, "What do you want to say?" And not everybody wanted to talk to the white guy from the suburbs with a camera in his hand. And I get that. That's fair. But a lot of people did. And if they wanted to talk, I wanted to listen. And they said things like this: "Stop pinning the acts of one person on an entire race. I don't care who you are or what you look like. You don't have the right to hurt anybody. And I want justice, and I want to be part of the solution. I'm here to show solidarity and pick up the pieces." You know, when I go around the country talking about this, I always say to people, I don't know what the news looked like for you, but here, the news had a lot of footage of burning buildings and frustrated people, and that was true. But what else was true was that every morning when I went out, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people sweeping up glass and boarding up buildings and making sure people had the food and the security they needed. When we see that kind of story on TV, I think it's always important that we ask ourselves, what else is true? We projected them on the side of that church at the end of the summer, just as a way to say to the community, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. We worked with veterans around PTSD and suicide prevention. This woman said, trauma doesn't define you. You may feel lost and alone, but you're not broken. If you're alive, hope lives, and healing can follow. Brian's suicide didn't stop his pain. It just gave a piece of it to everyone who knew and loved him. And Joe said, if suicide seems like the only answer, then you're asking the wrong question. I've learned to enjoy life again. Joe's a little bigger than me. When I told him, when I announced to the group what I was trying to do, Joe came up afterwards and stood right here and he said, I don't know what sort of art stuff, he didn't say stuff, you're trying to do, but I don't want anything to do with it. I said, okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be here. And at the last hour of the last day, he came and said, I do have something to share. And then when I shared these back to the community afterwards, he came up and gave me a bear hug that I thought was going to crush me. And he said, thanks for hearing our story. And again, I think if we can encounter one another and be curious and compassionate and set aside that need to play the game of who's right, who's wrong, and see that little bit of divinity in all of us, we start to win. Am I over time yet? Okay, all right. Almost done. And then we'll do a little Q&A. I just came back last week from Standing Rock Reservation. Got to go out there and work with youth. The woman who led the youth program said, when I ask the little kids what they dream of, they have great answers. By the time they're in 5th grade, those dreams are squashed out of them. Can we use your process to help them dream again? And I said, oh, let's try. So what do you dream is possible? This guy said, I hope one day our history would hold more weight against our future, allowing the necessary changes needed to mend the problems we face today. My dream is to enjoy time with family before it becomes a memory. I want to go to college and finish it, then get a job and make money so I can get food and survive. It's the 4th poorest county in all of America. I dream to be with my family because I miss them and I live far away from them. And what I dream is possible is that I could graduate and go to college and get a master's degree. In the midst of a really difficult place, people are still trying. People are trying hard. What else do I have here? Oh, just really quick, we have started doing international stories. Went over to Northern Ireland to talk about some of the ways they've moved through their sectarian violence, which technically ended 30 years ago with the signing of the Good Friday agreements, but they're still struggling with it. 93% of the schools are still segregated by faith, Protestant Catholic. There's still 26 miles of peace walls that are 40 feet tall to separate the communities. And there's still some really tough art going on in the area. Just went down to Louisiana and worked with a lot of indigenous communities down there to talk about indigenous sovereignty and land loss. Rosina Felipe was really proud of her t-shirt, I'm on indigenous land, so we did our portrait this way. We go into these hard places and we try to find stories of hope and healing and transformation because I think, in my understanding of my tradition, that's what Jesus did for us in the middle of a really difficult place. Last story I'll share with you this morning. When we were on the road, we went to Charleston to talk about some of the historical ramifications of slavery. Went to Mother Emanuel Church, and you probably remember in 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, walked up to this historically black church on a Wednesday night and asked if he could come in for Bible study, and they said, absolutely, come on in. And he went in and he sat in the basement of the church for an hour while they talked about the Word of God, and when everybody bowed their head to pray at the end of the evening, he pulled out a gun and he shot and he killed 9 people. Each of those doves up on that cross is for one of those people. And when I was there, I had a chance to interview Lee Bennett, and he's one of the church historians at Mother Emanuel. And I tend to get places early, which is not Lee's problem. Lee got there right on time, like he should have, like a normal person. But while I was waiting, I was standing up by those 3 doors, and I had these bags of equipment, and who knew what was in it, and I started feeling really self-conscious. I was asking Lee to trust me and let me come into that space, and he did. And I knew I wanted to ask this question, but I also knew I couldn't lead with it. But at some point in the conversation, I said, Lee, how is it that a guy who looks like you can come to trust a guy who looks like me after having that faith violated in such a horrific way? And he said, oh, that's easy, John. He said, this is not our house. He said, this is the Lord's house, and we're here to welcome and to love and to serve everybody who walks through the door. And he said, I don't know what your faith is. He said, but beyond that, he said, we can't allow the bad acts of one person to change who we are as human beings. And I thought, what if we could let that wash across the world? Whatever noise, whatever ugly, whatever crazy is going on out there, we can still hold on to what we know is right, and we can wash that into the world. I think, there you are. Where are you? Where are you? Wait, you weren't the person who hollered out, are you going to take this picture or not? Okay, because it took a while.
I'm like in
A line or the circle?
I'm at in the circle at the top.
Nice. I'm going to zoom in when I get home. Yeah. So this story reminds me of this project in that each of these stories is a point of light. Each of these stories is an example of the love and courage and creativity that we can move into the world. Dr. King shared a lot of good quotes with us, and I'm forever drawn to, you probably know it, hatred can't drive out hatred. Only what? Love can do that. And darkness can't drive out darkness. Only what? Light can do that. The more I work on this project, the more I'm in spaces like this, the more I understand that you and I are that love, and that you and I are the light, and that we have a lot of work to do. Thank you. Who gets this? You get that? Yeah. Questions?
Catherine, yep.
All
Catherine,
right.
can you turn the lights back up in the house? Great. Thanks, AJ.
Can I hold my coffee?
Yes.
Thanks.
Coffee's always welcome and invited in this space. I'm curious about the origins of photography for you.
Oh, yeah. I always loved taking pictures. I never realized it could be a career path and you could make a living. I'm still not convinced it is, but no, I always loved it. I bought my first camera when I was 9 or 10 years old, my first good DSLR. It was my way to explore the world. I was super introverted and super shy, and this was something I could hide behind,
Yeah.
and something I could observe the world through. And that, it stuck.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like the first time I heard you speak, you told the story about the first time you had to be on the other side of your camera.
No, I didn't like that at
Yeah.
all. Yeah. But over time, I love the combination of the aesthetic of the art and the technical of the craft, and putting those two things together worked pretty good for me, because when I took one of those aptitude tests in high school, it said I should either be an electrical engineer or a florist. I don't know what you do with that. But this is a pretty good fit.
Electric Flowers?
Maybe, yeah.
A good name for a band, too, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I am also curious about the moment or the period of time that led up to, and the moment when you and Karen, were sitting around wherever, and, decided you were going to put your house on the market and just go. We have to hear that story.
Yeah. So we had talked about doing that before the pandemic, because a piece of my mind was going 112 miles an hour, and we were apart more than we wanted to be. And we thought, well, what if we sold the house and she traveled with me while I was doing all of this programming. And then we could be together. And we couldn't really afford to keep a house and pay for our own health insurance and go on the road. But if we didn't have a house, we could maybe afford two of those things for her to quit her job. And so we're just on the verge of doing that, and then the pandemic happened. And in 48 hours, my 2020 schedule went from just jam-packed to empty. And so we started going broke again, and that was moderately uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And Karen said, well, you can't do your programming, but can't you still do interviews? I'm like, oh. And actually doing the stuff after George Floyd was killed and coming out into the world in the middle of the pandemic and going, oh, wait, we can do this. You know, we did the interviews. I shot the photos with a long lens. We could keep our distance. I'm like, I think we can do this. And so it was her idea. Took me about a minute and a half to say, okay. And, yeah, and we went. We didn't know what we were doing, but that's kind of the story of our life. And we chase it, and we believe it, and we trust it, and we figure it out.
Can you remember the feeling inside that you had when you made that decision to do that?
Yeah, our kids looked at us. They were, I don't know, they're 30 and 25 now, or 28 now, so you do the math. I don't know how old they were at the time, but 5 years younger. But they said to it, we said, does this seem weird to you that we're doing this? They're like, no, this seems like what you would do. My youngest is an artist and my oldest is a lighting designer for musicians. They have caught the bug of doing a non-traditional lifestyle, and so it seemed normal. What seemed weird is that one of our first stops was down in Yuma, Arizona, and at the time the United States had the highest COVID rates in the world, and Arizona had the highest COVID rates in the United States, and Yuma County had the highest COVID rates within Arizona. And we said, is this really a good idea? But there was a door that opened down there, and we're like, well, we got wheels, we can always leave. But it worked. We were able to, cook all our own food and camp outside, and it worked.
Would you use the word calling to describe what you do?
Yeah, there's no other good word for it.
Yep.
I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt nudged, and I explained the whole process as walking down a foggy path where you can see like a couple steps in front of you, but you can't see any further than that. But what happens when you take those couple of steps? Yeah. You can see the next one. And so we decided early on, as long as we could see a couple of steps, we'd keep going. And here we are.
It's incredible. And it makes me think, too, like when I first decided to go to seminary and become a pastor, I can remember, like what you just said about your kids and their response to it. It's sort of like when you get the affirmation of the people that you talk to, which happened for me over and over again after I decided to become a pastor, but one that has been sticking out to me lately is when I sat down and told my parents, which honestly, for those of you who are queer, feels a little like coming out. Like, I think I have to go to seminary. And I told the whole story. You don't start with that. You tell the whole story. And my mom said, "It sounds like you got the call." And it's such an affirmation of like, no, that's not weird. Of course, that's what you should
Guess
do.
you got to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
so.
awesome.
There are callings of all kinds, and that's why I'm just so taken by people who follow it. There's a line in a Denise Levertov poem that talks about the Annunciation, that talks about Mary. Aren't there annunciations of one sort or another in all of our lives? And some choose to take that leap, and others ignore it and go back to ordinary life. You are not leading an ordinary life.
I feel really honored. People throw blessed around quite easily sometimes,
Amen.
but I feel really fortunate to have figured out a way to do this and to have not necessarily had the courage, but the stubbornness to keep chasing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're chasing it. It also involves a lot of hustle, always, but we just know that there's some people who, hustle for a long time and never get anywhere. But when you hustle and you see something happening that feels beyond you, that's the thing that I'm watching from afar and around the edges and going, there's something going on here.
It's worth chasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You spent last summer in Northern Ireland,
Yep.
which I'd love to hear more about, of course. But are you ready to say what's next?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Couple of things. I mean, we are leaning into international stories, and so the next place, I think next summer will be Rwanda to talk about the ways they've moved through the genocide. Imperfectly, right? But with some really creative possibilities there. I'll probably wind up in Ukraine at some point. I'm not a combat photographer, so we'll wait a little bit. But
Yeah.
but we want to start exploring the ways that other societies have moved through conflict. Because boy, when I was in Northern Ireland, I saw a lot of parallels to what's going on here.
100%.
And so I think sometimes it's hard when you look in the mirror to recognize those issues. But if you can look at it over here and go, whoa, those people are nuts, then you go, oh, wait a minute. That looks familiar.
Yeah.
You know, and there are lessons that we need to learn. I heard somebody say a while ago, y'all are preparing for the storm, but the storm's here, right? And maybe our job is to gather and protect the seeds so that when the storm is past, we can replant again. And to surround ourselves with community and to be together and to not let go of that little bit of light and hope and flame. And so this is what we hope to do. One of our biggest roles going forward is to encourage the change makers, because that can be a lonely and difficult place to be. And if people said to me, aren't you just preaching to the choir? I'm like, oh, well, A, not really. Because we get to go to some really interesting places that are definitely not the choir, but B, the choir needs encouragement too. Because if the choir stops singing, we're all in a heap of mess. And so part of our job is to inspire that. And I am of the age where I won't do this forever. I still got a lot of gas left in the tank, but I am going to use this next decade to shift from maker to mentor, and to try to mentor the next generation of storytellers to help them amplify those voices of hope, healing, and transformation. So we got a lot to do.
You do. What do you dream is possible?
What do I dream is possible? I dream that we can shift our narrative to remember that thing that connects us.
Yeah.
One little bit at a time.
One little bit at a time. Thank you for being with us and telling your call story to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks you guys.